We have to start by talking, obviously, about your love affair with Dickens. And I'm trying to think of something which epitomised your love affair with Dickens. I think it was the time that you handled his pen. And you actually wept, didn't you? Tell me about that occasion.
I wondered what you were going to say. I was overcome with the emotion of it. I was
Where were you? Do you remember?
Yes, I was in the New York Public Library in the Berg collection. And there was the actual pen that he enclosed with his hand and wrote. And still it makes me feel a bit solemn. And
you cried real old tears.
I did. I don't know, it just came over me. I was overwhelmed because I do love him very much and I do respect him and I also hate him.
What's your first encounter with Dickens then? The very first encounter? Was it Little Dorrit?
The very first encounter was Oliver Twist when I was 11 as a schoolgirl.
Yeah.
And then later I had a professional interest.
Mm.
But Little Dorrit, you see, I'm Jewish, and Fagin is in Oliver Twist, and that alerted me to the extraordinariness of Dickens. Here was this character described as a slimy Jew crawling along the pavements, and I'd never heard Jews discussed like that. I mean, maybe Christians think that's what they're like, but I'd never heard that before, and I was immediately hooked. And then I started to laugh at him. And that combination of evil and comedy is a particular Dickensian trait, and one of his clevernesses that he can do that. And from that, I never left him. From that, I was hooked.
Because then you said, but I was interested, suddenly realising that, because when you eventually... because you go to Cambridge, don't you?
Yes.
And you're taught then at Newnham, you're taught by Leavis. Now, Leavis had F.R. Leavis, the great sort of English critic, had rather mixed, ambivalent feelings about it. I mean, at first he used to say in the early days about Dickens that Dickens wasn't an author who deserved the attention of the serious mind. But I think he changed later on. But did he teach you Dickens? Did he talk to you about it?
In fact, his wife, Queenie.
Queenie, oh yes.
Q.D. Leavis.
She's included in the acknowledgements, isn't she, at the back of your latest book about Dickens' women, yes.
Well, when you were taught by the Leavises, you never forgot it. And she was the person who opened my intellectual life, really. And I will cherish her memory forever. And yes, Leavis did change his mind. That shows how great he was. He wasn't one of those academics who just pursue one groove and never get over it. He changed his mind. He realised that Dickens is part of the great tradition of English novelists, that he is someone worthy of real respect as a developed artist. And I feel that too. And he taught us, because at Newnham, Jean Gooder was our supervisor, and she got the Leavises on board, and they allowed us to go and listen to his lectures because he was a Downing man. And Queenie actually came to Newnham and taught. And we went to their house in Bulstrode Gardens. And Queenie, at the end of every term, cooked the most fantastic cakes and biscuits and sweeties, because she was Jewish. He wasn't, but she was Jewish, so she knew how to cook.
Now, I knew Leavis a bit because he came up to York eventually after having some sort of row. I mean, he was always having rows. But what about the criticism of Dickens? And I'm thinking there was one I came across, for example, George Meredith, you know, the author of The Ego, talked about him as really a caricaturist, you know, that there was nothing that corresponds with life. Now, this business of caricature and character, I'm sort of interested in the distinction, because when you're doing these characters, do you fight against the notion of Dickens as a caricaturist? Because do you know what I mean?
He isn't a caricaturist. I get so cross when people say that.
I want you
because
to
it means that he's not real, that he's not focused on actually what people are like, that he's pulling out one element of them in a distorted way. He's not like that. He builds true. Yes, he builds big. His characters are big, But there are big characters in the world. And I think the way that he does it is to focus perhaps on one element that they show and develop it. But it's not caricature. No. That is a distortion. I think of his work as being revelatory. He's exploring and he's digging into a character, and they are real. To me, those characters are absolutely real.
But as you say, they're large.
Yes,
characters.
But what's wrong with that?
Nothing at all.
I'm large.
Nothing
you're tall. What's wrong with that?
Nothing at all. But you say somewhere that you perhaps drawn to them, because we've talked about, you mentioned your Jewishness already, but perhaps being Jewish draws you a little bit to outsiders and misfits, those people who are outside the orthodox, straightforward class structure.
I agree with you completely. That is true. And he was outside the class. Well, he was in it, actually. Lower middle was where he was grounded. Very difficult class to be in. And I think he felt an outsider, too.
That largeness, though, that sort of word, because you've occasionally admitted that sometimes when you're playing these characters, or when you're filming or on stage or whatever, that you are used to hearing people say to you, a little less, Miriam.
Less. Less. I
mean,
am.
Are you? Do you somehow feel sometimes almost that there's something too timid about the world? I mean, you almost as though you want to personally find a place in it for characters that are a bit larger than
yes,
life.
I think that's true. I do feel occasionally somewhat trammelled by the world around me, and I wish to be untrammelled. So I think sometimes I'm pushing aside the boundaries of perhaps good taste, or even of believability. I believe, but perhaps other people have a slightly narrower view than I do.
A lot of this, I mean, yours, I mean, I've been an admirer of you in so many ways for so many years, but so much of it lies in voice. And I want to just talk to you a little bit about, because I know you place a great emphasis upon what voice tells you about people. I mean, you yourself, a very fine voice. Was that Mary Plowman, was it, who taught you elocution?
My word, you have done your research.
But elocution
God
lessons.
rest her dear
so
soul.
I wondered what your voice was like before Mary Plowman got her hands on you.
Not unlike this, I don't think. Remember, I was born in Oxford. I was conceived in an East End air raid, and that's always there at the back, boiling away. But I was actually born in Oxford. And Oxford has a particular voice and a particular arrogance, I think. And I demonstrate that, perhaps unfortunately, in my ordinary voice. I know it's what people call posh, and I don't particularly like that. I find it useful, because when I'm with posh people, I can sound like them and feel perfectly at home. But it does cut me off a bit, I think, from everyone else.
Does it betray you then? Because I think the example that you once used when you were talking about the ways in which voices allowed you to sense the people the speaker was trying to emulate, you used the example of Robert Maxwell. Because you said something about listening to Robert Maxwell, you could tell what he was trying to be.
Don't you agree with that?
Oh, well, I do, yes, because he was trying to be as English as he could.
He wanted to be an English gentleman.
Yes.
And he was a Czech bounder. And he quite cleverly assumed the vowels of the English. But there was something a little bit off, always, about it.
So you listen in that way. When you come across someone, are you listening for the way in which the voice might contradict the character which is being suggested by clothes and by...
No, I don't have that kind of scepticism about people as they present themselves, but I am looking for clues. Clues to tell me where they come from, what sort of education they've had, who their parents were, what their politics are. All those things are useful, and they're all somewhere in the voice. And if you listen hard enough, you can find little clues, and that's fascinating to me.
And it's not just the sound of the voice, it's the rhythm of the voice, isn't it? Because this is back to Dickens again, because I think what you relish in Dickens, and I think I remember you citing something, I think it is Magwitch's a speech by Magwitch in Great Expectations, that his capacity to capture speech rhythms, speech inflections.
he listened to people more perhaps than any other novelist in those times. He was able to reproduce on a page the spoken sounds that he heard around him. One of the things that is interesting is that he always makes lower class people transfer the letter V into W. Now, we don't do that anymore. Cockneys don't say very, it's very nice. They say very, it's very nice. But he heard it as werry. Now, I don't know whether that's what actually happened, but I think it must have been, because he was very accurate.
Do you have, because you're so interested in voice, you can do so many voices, are there some voices that you hear that you particularly love? I'm thinking of, say, somebody like Dylan Thomas, the sound of that voice, those voices. Are there other?
That's a wonderful, sonorous, expressive instrument. And to hear him reading his own work, well, I chose one of his records for my Desert Island when I did Desert Island Discs, because I think that is a magnificent voice, very much like Richard Burton. There's never been a voice like Richard Burton's. It's a voice of fire and ice. It's gripping and thrilling and masculine. I absolutely admire that voice. But I also like the ordinary voice, the people that just talking. My grandmother, who was a Scottish Jew, born in Odessa. Well, for me, that was a very special sound. That was the mixture of the two, and I love that. To me, that brings back a whole world that's gone now. And when I was in Edinburgh recently, and I talked to people there, and in Glasgow where she lived, nobody talks like that anymore. It's all gone. They're dead. They're all dead. Which
a paradox to which you're fully alert and alive about Dickens doing Dickens women, and about the paradox of the fact that Dickens didn't understand women. We've got plenty of people who can testify to that, not least his daughter Kate, I think, who was pretty... and his brutality we know about to his wife Catherine. I mean, we knew about this a bit before. Claire Tomlin told us in more detail, but I mean, the descriptions that he gave of his wife, and as you yourself in the introduction to your Dickens women talk about the way he has recourse to stereotypes because of his inability to produce a complete woman. His prepubescent, unattainable, grotesque, the longings, all those categories of women, many of whom you play in this, but all of whom are not complete women in a way. But then, and this is, you enter an excuse for him. I think it's an excuse, or you say that all our relations depend upon our initial relations with our parents. I mean, to what extent do you think that gets him off the hook? Because we had a bad time with his own mother, didn't he?
Yes, I don't think it excuses, but I think it explains. I think he was damaged, a damaged psychology, and I think it was his mother who damaged him, but he allowed that to go on throughout his life. And, I think that's foolish and wrong. I blame him for that. But his mother treated him badly. She was harsh in a way that he couldn't accept. And that somehow stimulated him emotionally to be able to write about children the way he did. No one has ever written about children as Dickens did. And he, I think, saw himself as a deprived child. And because of that, he was able to depict these moving children in literature. I don't like children very much, but I like Dickens' children.
Now, let's talk a little bit, if we may, about your mother. We're keeping in mind this reference that you made to Dickens and relations with your parents, constitute your relations later on. I mean, she's called Ruth. You were just ballsy, shrewd, extrovert. She left school at 14. You absolutely adored her. some little suggestion, a little indication that she might have been a little bit too extrovert. You even accepted or slightly accepted the word later in life, I think, that she might have been just a tad vulgar.
Yes, I think she probably was, actually. But she had such vitality that I never saw that until later. I mean, I'm looking at her now through the prism of age, which is a distorting influence on me as well. And I'm also seeing her through the eyes of perhaps those around me. She was big, she was fat, she was loud, she was warm, she was caustic, and she was embarrassing. She would.
Oh, she was embarrassing.
She was. Well, when we went to people's houses, you know, if I was invited or she was invited, she'd pick up the plate and look at the back of it and say, oh, Doulton, you know, and she'd say, you could get £15 for that. You know, she would price everything. And I think that is perhaps a little vulgar. And I do that, so I'm vulgar too.
And she was wonderfully pushy, wasn't she? Because you got...
yes.
I've got two instances which I think are just lovely. And one was the thing that you were invited by... I don't know where the invitation came from, really, but you were invited by Augustus John. I don't know how old are you, to go and pose?
I asked to go and pose for him.
You're being pushy.
I was the pushy one.
Oh, okay. So you know...
I fell in love with him on television, perhaps as people fall in love with you as you're doing this interview. John Freeman, a predecessor of yours,
yes,
in that kind of role, he interviewed Augustus John in the Face-to-Face programme.
Yes, sir.
And I saw this wonderful old man boiling with sexuality, with power, with vision. And I thought, I want to meet that man. I want to do something for him.
How old are you, Miriam, at this?
17.
Okay.
And I wrote to him and said, I'll model for you for nothing. I didn't know that he wanted me to model nude. I probably wouldn't have offered because I'd have been embarrassed, because I've never been proud of my body. It's a shocking body. But anyway, I wasn't bad at 17. And for some reason, my parents allowed me to do it. I never know why they
your mum
did.
was a famous person, and you were going. Because I mean, it's a bit like because later on there's more purpose to it when your mum does the thing with Isaiah Berlin, no less. I mean, first of all,
yes,
there you are posing for Augustus John, but then you know, around about this age as well, your mother's meeting Isaiah Berlin and saying, "Our Miriam should be coming to Cambridge."
Well, the thing was, Mummy was pushy for those she loved. She was pushy for me, for my father. She wasn't really pushy for herself. She wanted me to succeed with all her heart. And in a way, perhaps I have. I don't know if she would think that I'm now, you know, where I should be. But she invited Isaiah Berlin, who was a patient of my father's, and asked him directly if he would support my application for college entrance. And of course he did.
What a reference.
I know, well, that's the point. But how did she know, being someone who had never had any schooling at all, really?
Left at 14, as we said.
Left at 14. How did she know that Isaiah Berlin was somebody who would open every intellectual door? She knew, she was shrewd. She had her ear to the ground in that way. And she immediately knew this was the man to ask. And so, of course, no college would turn me down. It wasn't that I was bright, it was she was bright.
When you're talking about, we're talking about your mother a lot, and but of course...
Good, because she deserves to be talked about.
But sort of that does push your dad slightly into a shadow, because your dad was less easy to read, more of a mystery. And you once said that he was always afraid that the door would shut in his face, and as though he was a bit frightened. And I'm not quite certain what he was frightened about. I wonder. Tell me what you meant when you talked about him in that way as being a bit of a mystery. I mean, you've described your mother. She's explicit. She's extrovert. You know, you can see where she's coming from. You know the sort of person she is. But your father, Joe, physician, as you say, difficult to understand.
He was a shy, quiet man, and when he married into an explosion, and he didn't really know for the rest of his life how to deal with it. She was huge in every way, and he was having to deal with that. And I think it was It was beyond him, actually.
Ah.
I think he found it difficult. He adored her.
They adored each other, didn't
They adored each other, and they adored me, and we were I have described this as a fortress family. But he was desperately shy and quiet. He didn't want to be noticed. And my mother did, and I do. You know, I'm upset if people don't notice me, which is a bit pathetic, actually. But that's the truth.
You're the only child in this fortress family, so you're there was even a suggestion that your mother didn't want to have any other children.
Oh, no, she didn't want childbirth. She didn't. I'm amazed that they actually consummated the marriage, to be honest.
Because a cousin of hers had died in childbirth.
Yes, and I found out afterwards that was true.
Yes.
They had. So she was terrified of sex, really. And I don't know how much it played a part in my parents' life.
But if you are the only child, but it seems, reading about your childhood, not just an only child, but you are an adored only child. You know, you are the focus of attention. Your parents
cherished.
Yes, and even to the expense of perhaps of you not making friends because you're so much locked into the family. I think.
Oh no, that's not the case.
One or two friends have complained you spent so much time with your family that they couldn't get to see you.
My friends may have complained, but I was never held back from friendship. And one of the things I'm proudest of in my life is the friends that I have made all over the world. I find it easy to make friends because I'm confident. My parents gave me confidence. And so I can reach out to people unafraid. And I have wonderful friends. No, they never stopped me from making friends. They may have made it difficult for friends to come to my house, but Mummy was very hospitable. Her tomato sandwiches were the talk of the town. I have never had tomato sandwiches the way Mummy used to make them.
But it was a hothouse intensity. I'm still saying that it was
very much
very safe,
so.
wasn't it?
Emotion was bubbling on the surface all the time.
You told your mother everything, she told you everything.
Yes, absolutely. I used to get into bed with Mummy every day, every single day until she died. Until I left home, anyway. And we would talk about the world and everything that we thought and people. We shared everything. She had a huge effect on me.
And we need this context, don't we, to understand. I mean, a very rather familiar, perhaps over-rehearsed story about you is the way that, you know, when you tell your mother that you're gay, then, you know, shortly afterwards, 3 days later, she has a stroke. But, you know, when some people, I think, hear that story, they think, well, you know, why did she tell her mother? But you've already explained that this is you are used to telling each other everything. And then here, so therefore it is not... It is not unusual. It's not strange. It's not aberrant in any way to tell her about this.
I can't hold back from anything. I'm telling you everything. That's the way I was brought up, to be open. Most people are brought up to be closed, but I wasn't. And therefore it was natural for me to talk to my mother about everything. And I think that's right. I think people should. I don't think people should have secrets from each other. So I defend absolutely the way I was brought up. I think I was spoilt. I was indulged too much. That's where they were wrong. They loved me too much. But they didn't stop me from having friends.
I mean, I always think, and I think perhaps you do now a little bit, that you blame yourself or too much, or you see the stroke as too much related to the revelation. But I know that, afterwards, it was really the aftermath, because probably your mother wanted you to have a conventional Jewish marriage. It probably wasn't necessarily the revelation of your sexuality so much as the loss of that prospect, I wonder. But anyway, but moving on from that, you then had, of course, 7 years in which your mother's in a wordless prison. Someone who spoke so much and so exuberantly is silent, and you spend 7 years looking after her.
It's something I fear, that I would be visited by a stroke as my mother was. It's in a way a wrong word for what it is. A stroke sounds a very affectionate, gentle thing. Yeah. But a stroke of the sort that my mother had is a blow. It is a catastrophe that felled her in a moment. And it was the worst time of my life.
You still had the sense, did you, and I mention this because I have a close friend who recently had a stroke, so I'm seeing this myself. Did you sense that her brain, that she was that thoughts were there in her brain, but simply she had an incapacity to communicate them? Did you feel that she was, as it were, mentally living still?
No.
Even though...
No, she wasn't brain dead. She did have thoughts, but she didn't have thoughts the way you and I do. She didn't have fleeting, coherent thoughts. She had long, agonizing difficulties, and it was absolutely horrific. And I will never get over it. It's always at the back of my mind, that the fear that could happen to me, because it's a medical thing. But it gave me a sense of the tragedy of life. And perhaps without that, I would have been a very trivial person. And I don't believe I am a trivial person now. But I could have been without that.
And yet you say, so we were talking before about, I mentioned about friendship, and and I understand you bridled the sort of implication that perhaps your parents were stopping you making friends or something, but you did describe, after your mother died, you said that it was something of a liberation. And when I first read that, I thought, oh, I know what you're talking about is the fact that, you don't now have to look after her, and she's freed from this business of being in this wordless prison. But you go on to say that because if she'd been alive, she might have wanted to interfere in the relationship that you had with your partner, and that she might have wanted to break that up.
Yes, I believe she would have. Mummy knew no bounds or no boundaries.
She would have done that.
She would have, because she would have felt it was wrong. She felt homosexuality was an aberration, something not exactly disgusting, but pitiful. And she would not have accepted it in me. She simply would not have accepted it. And I don't agree with that. I think you're born, or it comes upon you, and you go with it. I wouldn't dream of being gay or straight. I'm who I am, and that was the path that I took, and that's where I am, and I defend it, and I don't have to defend it. That's it. That's where we are. But Mummy would not have accepted it.
How much are your parents still with you? How much do you still remember them? And you've done a great deal of genealogical research, haven't you? You've gone back into... your father died in 1995. I think he was 96 years old, and you spent years looking after him, as you did with your mum. But I think I found it a bit difficult to trace this, but because your father's family comes from Belarus, right? And you've actually... I managed to find something. You traced him back to... Was it Grodno in Belarus? Was that the town?
The family, yes.
Yeah,
My father
family
was born in Glasgow.
But you've spent a long time going around trying to find the route.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm very interested in doing that. You ask how much my parents are with me?
That's the answer. Still, yes. I wonder if I could put it like this. Some people have perhaps said to you, I have an idea that your therapist once said to you that you should try to be a bit more objective about them. Did you take that advice?
Yes and no. Up to a point. But how can I be objective about people I love? I'm not objective. It's not human. I can criticise them, but I love them, and I love them still, and they gave me life. My goodness, how can I be critical?
I've got to be a vulgar Freudian here, though, because this is the idea of you being the eternal child. You know where I'm going. I think the little statement that I think your therapist made said that you were a talented toddler. Age 7. Her task was to try to get you to the age of 12. And you were talking before about Dickens being able to see through the eyes of a child. I'm just trying to put this together. There is something, I mean, is this about something childlike or something childish that you still want to retain? I mean, when you admire Dickens being able to see through the eyes of a child, I mean, sometimes when I watch you, particularly on somewhere like a chat show, people say, "Oh, good heavens, look what she said," and I said, "Yes, but she's being naughty. She's the child at the tea party, and and she's farting at the tea party." Now I love it. I love it. I mean, I know.
haven't farted here, have I?
No,
You're lucky.
No, we might wait till later on. But you see, some say, "Oh, I don't think she knows." No, I said, no, she's disingenuous. That's in a way what I know. You love the physical part of your life, and I've read that being shocking is one of the ways in which you say you get rid of nerves. If you can produce an effect, all of a sudden you're in charge and in control a little tiny bit. But is there something childish, something impish, something about fucking up the tea party about this?
Well, yes, I suppose there is. I mean, I think I have got. You made me cry, actually. Thinking about Mummy and Daddy. No, it's all right. I just wiped it. I think there is something a bit childish or childlike about me. But, I mean, so what? I mean, that's who I am. I'm perfectly capable of being adult and severe and quite unpleasant on occasion. But, yes, and I don't mind that bit of the imp. I think it's quite useful. And I have fun. It's quite fun sometimes to see people reeling back in shock when I've said something. But, sometimes there's no harm in that. I don't want to hurt anybody, ever.
You've been very honest about people you don't like, haven't you?
Yes.
You've always said, these are the people I like and these are the people that I don't get.
But it's good to be clear. So much is obfuscated in life. Yeah. I like it to be clear. I don't mean that you can't allow ambivalence, and you can allow also change, as Leavis did when he took Dickens on board. But I do like a certain clarity in my relationships and in all things, and I force it on people occasionally.
But in the wonderful world of showbiz, it's very unusual to find someone who is prepared to say that their star they're working alongside in a film is dull and dreary and tedious or whatever, isn't it? I
suppose it is, because
we're all supposed to
people
come on and say how wonderful everybody is.
Yes, and on the whole, I think it's nice if you can be positive, if you can find a positive angle about somebody. Do it. Mummy used to say that. She said, don't speak ill of people. Always speak good of them if you can, or speak well of them.
Now, there's another area of explicitness where you've got into some trouble, a much more serious area in a way than that of, personal dislikes and grudges. This is over Israel and over attitudes to Israel. I mean, you've said, I'm a proud and an ashamed Jew, which is, as I read, a response to those very pro-Israeli groups who want to say that anybody who speaks out about anything that's going on in Israel should be ashamed of themselves because they are really denying something about their own identity. I mean, you've gone to refugee camps with Action Aid, you've gone to a place like Socio, and you've pronounced that nobody in the world should have to live like this when you've seen it. But I've even found out on the internet that there was some Jewish group wanted to come and picket the theatre where you were appearing because they wanted to draw attention to what they saw as your unreasonable criticism of Israel.
Yes, it was when I was performing at the Arts Depot in Finchley, which is a new venue to me and a rather nice one. But it is, of course, in Finchley, which is the area where a lot of Jewish people live. I live in Clapham, I would like to make that clear. And I was astonished to learn, or I didn't know it when I was performing, because I went into the theatre early, and this demonstration was going on outside. But it was quite vehement, and a member of the audience who was supporting me was actually arrested and subsequently released because he'd never been in trouble with the police before, and I don't know who he was even. But, yes, it is a very difficult area for me. It's a difficult one, and I have to be unusually careful about what I say, because I don't want to make things worse. I want to make things better. But what I would say is, if you go to the West Bank and to Gaza and you see the effect of the Israeli occupation on the people and the way that the occupation is being carried out, whoever you are, you would be appalled. And that this is not good for Israel, publicly and privately, and it should be stopped. And the only way I can see that we can stop it is if the diaspora, the people not in Israel, bring pressure to bear on the Israeli government and say, you can't do this. This is wrong, and it is contrary to everything that Jewish people believe about how to treat others. I think we have already lost the propaganda war, and I think we deserve to lose it. We, remember, I'm saying we, because I have to stand alongside Jewish people, because I am one. So my beef, if you like, is with Jews, with Israelis. I can only speak to them. I can't speak to Arabs or Palestinians, only as an outsider, and it would seem to me to be perhaps impertinent to do so. But I'm a Jew, and I want Jews to be good and fine, and as I believe they always used to be. And Israel is an abomination at the moment. And it's not an easy thing to say, and it's brought me a lot of trouble, especially from people that I love, like Maureen Lipman, who is a fellow artist, a magnificent person, and somebody who publicly has castigated me for my opinion, which she has every right to do, as do the people who demonstrated against me. They have every right to demonstrate. And I believe that I have the right to say what I say. It is not a comfortable position to be in, but I believe that I am telling the truth, and I will not stop.
When I've spoken about this matter to other people on this programme, in particular Howard Jacobson and Frederick Raphael, I must be careful not to misinterpret them, but I think that what concerns them is the fact that a criticism of Israel can be taken up by those people who are anti-Semitic, and they can use this as an opportunity to voice what are essentially anti-Semitic opinions. Of course, this can't be said of you, but do you feel there is a danger that attacks upon Israel, I'm talking about verbal attacks, political attacks, propaganda attacks upon Israel, can be used to disguise anti-Semitism?
Without doubt, they're absolutely right. That doesn't excuse making I mean, of course there are anti-Semites. It's a very real thing, anti-Semitism. I've experienced it, loathsome as it is. But I can't hold back a criticism because it might be used against Jews, generally speaking. I don't accept that. I think if you see something is wrong, you have to speak out against it, whoever is doing the wrong. It's like the Catholic Church covering up the horrific paedophilia that was endemic throughout the church. It's the cover-up that is shocking. And I feel it's a very similar thing. I will not be silent.
To turn away from that, it's always seemed to me that you have not been allowed or not been credited with sufficient seriousness. Sometimes I wonder if it's partly your fault. It's partly your fault.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
No, because you put in, so many magnificent performances, and you win awards. I mean, The Age of Innocence, I'm just thinking, and Endgame as well. I mean, that was with Mark Rylance, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Performances
and
like
Simon McBurney and Tom Hickey.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I mean, performances like that were, very widely praised, and yet somehow, well, I don't know. It's the old, but the National hasn't called, or you haven't been. And I get, when I read what you have to say about this, that you do feel in a way that you wish that more serious side of you, that capacity to play those sorts of parts had been recognised. Is that true?
Oh yes, I think it is. Mind you, there's many actresses who would say that they haven't had the career they wanted.
No.
And And that's true. But yes, I feel that it is my fault because I've been a funny little person, and perhaps maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I really am not in the top drawer, and that is also possible. But of course, you don't want to think that about yourself. No, I have been asked to go to the National recently, and I wasn't free to do it. I wasn't able to do it. I have been asked to go to the RSC many years ago, but not recently. And yes, I would like to be considered a proper actress, not just a funny little cameo role.
You don't want to go on being naughty Miriam for...
Well, naughty Miriam as a human being, perhaps, because that is obviously it's a part of who I am, but I am capable of delivering proper perfs, proper performances, and I'd like to be considered as such. But, you take it as it comes.
There you are. I mean, these big Hollywood films, Leonardo DiCaprio, Barbara Streisand.
And he knows me, yes.
Yes, he knows you, but I mean, do you still... well, perhaps this is just me. This is just a sort of provincial boy talking. But, the idea, suddenly, you're escorted in and here's Barbara Streisand and she comes up to you and says, "Hi, hello, how are you today?" I mean, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this rather lovely to know all these people?
Oh, of course
and your good friends, people like Maggie Smith, Rowan Atkinson, all the people that you particularly like, I know.
Well, I mean, I've worked with them, you see. But
they're friends now.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're friends. I think Maggie Smith would be appalled if she thought I was described as a friend of hers. So a friend? Well, she's very nice, but I don't know that I'd want to spend a lot of time with her, really. No, I have other close friends. I know a lot of people, like we all do in the business. I don't think celebrities are friends of mine. They are in a higher plane, and I wouldn't presume.
We should say here that your mother and father were together for 43 years, and that you have been with your present partner. We're not going into details because I know that you don't want to, but it's worthwhile saying that you've been with her for longer than that now. I think it's about 44. Yes,
is it really?
44, yes,
It's
longer.
really?
You've beaten your mother. You've beaten your mother and father relation, and there's a little mirror image here as well. I think because in a way, if we're talking that this is a relationship of contrast, like your own parents, because you are your mother. Your partner is much, in terms of characteristics, much more academic, much more...
Yes, she's a much finer person than I am. I wonder that she's put up with it, really. But yes, I'm very blessed. I'm very blessed. I think life is sweeter shared, and I have been able to share my life with a magnificent person who prefers to take a quieter role than I do. And so I don't mention her name and publicly appear with her, but that's her wish. And those who know me know who she is, and she's wonderful and wise and sharp and Australian.
Last line I'm going to give you is one of your lines, and it's a slightly sad line, but it's a lovely line, perhaps an epitaph for you, in which you once said you were regretting perhaps the lack of leads at the National. You've just mentioned you've been approached by the... And you said, "I may have to settle for the smiles I've got." Nice phrase. Do you mean that? Can you settle for that?
No. I want more, and we'll see what the next few years brings. But at least I've had a chance to talk to you, and that's a lovely thing. And I've been very honest with you, and I might regret it afterwards, looking at this, if I ever get to see it. But I'm glad of the opportunity to set some things straight. Not my sexuality, but no, I want my epitaph to be that I made a difference.